It's been 4 years since Boko Haram kidnapped more than 270 schoolgirls in Nigeria, and around 100 remain missing. Negotiations between the government and the terror group to release the girls stalled last week. Nigeria's president cited disagreements among militants.
The abduction sparked global outrage and protest, and the hashtag #BringBackOurGirls echoed throughout the world. The UN's Children Agency recently found Boko Haram has kidnapped more than 1,000 children in Nigeria since 2013. For more on this, let's bring in Washington Post Global Opinions editor Karen Attiah. Karen, good to see you.
Hi, Vlad. Thanks for having me.
So it's important to talk about this story because it's been 4 years, and we've already seen one other mass kidnapping by Boko Haram just this year. But this is something that's been going on for many years. The attack on children, specifically by Boko Haram, is something that is done perennially. And yet this one moment back in April of 2014 sparked a global movement to bring attention to this. But why are children still in danger, specifically in northern Nigeria?
Right. I mean, one thing about Boko Haram to keep in mind is that they tend to attack any sort of institutions that represent sort of Westernization or Western education. So the attacks on schools, the attacks on churches, they have been kidnapping women and girls for years and years and years, thousands of them, and not just girls, but also boys. I think we need to keep in mind that boys and men have also been kidnapped and also been used as fighters or used as suicide bombers increasingly. So thinking back to 4 years ago, it's important to keep in mind that the hashtag was started by Nigerians and Nigerian women specifically, who were really trying to campaign for their own government to be responsive to what had just happened. The previous administration of the President Goodluck Jonathan had been slow to respond to Boko Haram, especially when they were on the rise in 2009. And so 2014 really drew the world's attention not only to Boko Haram, but Nigeria's slowness in addressing the terrorism problem, which by many accounts is one of the world's most deadliest terrorist groups.
Why has the government and the military been so ineffective when it comes to containing Boko Haram? What is it about this group that makes it difficult?
Yeah, I mean, Boko Haram, I mean, first of all, I think in a lot of ways, the sort of slowness of the government in Abuja in the initial stages led Boko Haram to grow into a force that was capable of taking entire territories. If we remember back in 2015, Boko Haram was literally sort of annexing territory and taking control of places in Yobe State, Adamawa State, that sort of thing. You look at issues of corruption in the Nigerian military, issues of Boko Haram, in many cases, having better arms, better equipment than even the Nigerian government. And a lot of it also comes down to sort of intelligence capabilities. Now, Nigeria has been able to make some inroads against Boko Haram, particularly in cooperation with Chad, Niger, Cameroon. And so I think in a lot of ways, Boko Haram perhaps is not as deadly as it used to be. However, the fact that they are still able to carry out these mass kidnappings still indicates that they are a threat that needs to be taken seriously.
So, Karen, one of the things that I think a lot of people may not be aware of is in just a month or so before these girls were kidnapped in Chibok, there was another horrific attack on a school. This time, some boys were burned alive. Their throats were slit. Those who tried to escape the burning school that was set on fire by Boko Haram had their throats slit. And I was there at the time in Nigeria working for another network, and we reported extensively on that. But it wasn't until April of 2014 when these girls went missing from Chibok that the entire world started to notice. And I wonder what your insights are on why that kidnapping was so significant, why that hashtag took root and took command of the entire world's attention the way that it did in drawing attention to this crisis that has faced Nigeria essentially since 2009.
Right. I mean, sometimes it's hard to predict when something will go viral, but I think in this particular instance, again, Nigerians that were fed up with their own government's inability to be able to address this crisis. And I think, because I remember writing about this at the time, a bit of a sort of exhaustion of perhaps the world not caring, right, about what happens in Africa, what happens to people who are victims of terror and victims of violence, and the fact that these were girls, that these were young girls who were attending school and did nothing wrong. Their only sort of crime was to gain an education. It was just sort of this perfect storm, I think, of reasons for the world to mobilize against it, or against Boko Haram, and to really pressurize the Nigerian government. And so for the fact that celebrities, Michelle Obama even joining in the campaign, I think again speaks to the fact that we were all sort of fed up, not only with Boko Haram, not only with the government slowness, but fed up with ignoring when Africans are victims of just horrific violence.
And that point is really important to make, because it wasn't just the world. When these girls were kidnapped, the Nigerian government, I remember calling the defense minister and other officials in the government, and I think that they thought that this was just going to go the way that all these other attacks that had happened in Nigeria up until that point. I think they said, look, yeah, we're working on it. We're going to try to bring these girls home. And I don't think they took it seriously, as they had not up until that point. They were banking on this this antipathy that you're talking about around the world, that people would not care about, and especially given the fact that these were women, these were girls. They were banking on the fact that people would just say, well, that's just Africa.
Right, absolutely. And if we remember, take a trip back down memory lane, there were Patience Jonathan, the former First Lady and the wife of Goodluck Jonathan, even the reports that she was trying to disrupt the protesters or sending orders for them to be disbanded, even supporters of the government saying that the whole thing was a hoax and was made up and was just politicized to just discredit Goodluck Jonathan. And again, I mean, the slowness, and even Goodluck Jonathan to go up to Chibok and even visit the area and visit or have the parents be able to come visit. It just reminds us, just 4 years ago, even just all of this was about using whatever tools was necessary to pressurize, again, the Nigerian government to do something. And I think, yeah, absolutely, they were hoping that this would blow over, but luckily, I would say, I would argue that it was one of the probably main reasons that the Goodluck Jonathan administration was really weakened in the eyes of not only Nigerians, but in the world, and he ended up losing the election. So it'll be up to Muhammadu Buhari, right, to continue to be able to guarantee the safety of his citizens, the safety of schoolgirls and school children. Boko Haram, again, with the kidnapping that happened just recently in Dapchi, where over 100 girls were kidnapped. Luckily, a good number of them were returned. But again, this is something that Nigeria still will be having to face for a long time.
Karen Attiah, Global Opinions Editor for The Washington Post. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.